Lord, we thank you for your word. We thank you for this time. I pray in Jesus' name that your Spirit would come and have his way in your word. It would be your words and your intellect, your heart, your will that's conveyed here tonight and not mine. I pray that he would come and fill in the gaps of my understanding and the things that are lacking here. And I just pray that this would be profitable and that your word would accomplish the goal for which you've set it forth. In Jesus' name, amen. So, chapter 29 is... the way that I've outlined the chapter is not super conducive to, teaching it verse by verse, so I'm going to pretty much read through it, and then we're going to go back through it, because there are kind of a couple different outlines overlapping each other, if that makes sense. And so instead of mingling the two, we're just going to kind of read through it, and then I'm going to go back and touch on the high points. So kind of similar to what we've been doing. Proverbs 29, verse 1. He who is often rebuked and hardens his neck will suddenly be destroyed, and that without remedy. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice, but when a wicked man rules, the people groan. Whoever loves wisdom makes his father rejoice, but a companion of harlots wastes his wealth. The king establishes the land by justice, but he who receives bribes overthrows it. A man who flatters his neighbor spreads a net for his feet. By transgression, an evil man is snared. I think this verse here is interesting. We're not going to really touch on this aspect of it later, and I like this here that it says an evil man is snared. Now, a good man, the New Testament clearly teaches us that we can be, even as righteous people, we can be ensnared by sin. But I find in this an interesting truth that as a believer, as a child of God, being made positionally righteous, we have that advocate with the Father where we can always find grace, a ready advocate with the Father to find grace. But the righteous sings and rejoices. The righteous considers the cause of the poor, but the wicked does not understand such knowledge. I think it's interesting there in verse 7 that it doesn't just say the righteous takes care of the poor. It says the righteous considers the cause of the poor. I think this is a very important truth, particularly in our generation, because to be completely honest, a lot of the poor or the homeless people in our culture are not really totally similar to a lot of the poor and the homeless people in Jesus' day and age. And I think it takes some consideration of a person's estate and of the estate of the poor. I'm not going to comment a whole lot on that, but I think that we shouldn't be brainless about our help that we give to people. We should be considerate, and we should take consideration. Verse 8, scoffers set a city aflame, but wise men turn away wrath. If a wise man contends with a foolish man, whether the fool rages or laughs, there is no peace. Kind of saying it's pointless to contend with a fool, as Proverbs has said over and over and over again. And you might say, well, that's Old Testamental, but in the New Testament it does say not to cast your pearls before swine. And we've already considered that. If you want to consider that truth, I actually think we took a teaching and spent quite a bit of time on that truth. So I'm not going to reiterate it here. Verse 8, scoffers set a city aflame, but wise men turn away wrath. Verse 9, verse 10, the bloodthirsty hate the blameless, but the upright seek his well-being. A fool vents all his feelings, but a wise man holds them back. It's very important not to be governed by your feelings. It seems like I'm thinking of two songs that came out in the last 4 or 5 years. One of them was Say What You Need to Say, and then there's another country song I think that came out in the last year and a half that are essentially, they just tell you, to get it off your chest and say whatever you have to say. And my goodness, a fool vents all his feelings. A fool brainlessly vents all his feelings. Do you understand where I'm going at with this? Is that it's one of the things that Alicia and I talk about about marriage counseling, premarital counseling. one of the things we talk about, this kind of dovetails under one of the truths that we share with young couples, and that is some things don't ever need to be said. You know, there are things that I've done that have hurt Alicia and wounded her over the years that she's never told me about. She forgave me. She let the blood cover those things. She didn't see a pattern in them. She saw it as maybe I was stressed out. I lost my temper. I said something I shouldn't have said. You know, I hurt her feelings or whatever. And as much as she wanted to, you know, get it off her chest, she prayed about it and she said, you know what? I feel a peace about letting this go, about forgiving him and not venting this and saying this. And guys and girls, I'll tell you the truth, there is a lot of wisdom to not venting all of your feelings. There is a time to say what needs to be said when the Holy Spirit is prompting you to do it, and you have a peace about it, and the person is in a receptive state of mind and heart. Then there's a time being prompted by the Holy Spirit to say to talk, to deal with that issue, but a fool vents all his feelings. And I can't remember the country song name, but those songs irk me to no end, because I wonder how many thousands, if not millions of people in the last 5 years have been driving down the road thinking about something that somebody else did that hurt them, someone like a wife or someone else very meaningful to them, and they hear that song and they're like, yeah! And they go home and they vent all their feelings and destroy a very important relationship because of some absurd song that just says you should always vent all of your feelings. You know, you just say what you need to say because it's really all about you anyways. That is not the way to live life. There is oftentimes in the Christian life, in meaningful relationships with people, whereas Paul said to the Corinthians in the first epistle, when he was talking about them suing brethren, taking their matters between each other to a secular court, and he says, why don't you just allow yourself to be defrauded? What a crazy threshold to pass where you actually go, you know what, I'm going to this was a pretty major thing this person did to me. There was actually money involved, and I'm just going to let them rip me off because it's really not about me, and I have a peace about it, and this is where God is governing me to go with this. I'm not saying to be a doormat or to always let that happen. Paul clearly said that, you know, if you feel it's necessary, then take it before the church and have the church arbitrate the issue. But I know I harp on that every time it comes up, but it's one of those things, every time I hear one of those songs, I just think about all the thousands of relationships that have had to have been destroyed by someone listening to one of those songs while they were ticked off and saying something that didn't need to be said. A fool vents all his feelings, but a wise man holds them back. Don't be governed by your feelings. Verse 12, if a ruler pays attention to lies, all his servants become wicked. The poor man and the oppressor have this in common. The Lord gives light to the eyes of both. Both the poor man and the oppressor, their lives are in the hands of the Lord, and judgment will come, and there is a day of reckoning, and there is, in that day of reckoning, in the eternal perspective, there is a justice in reality and a certain equality in the eternal perspective to all men. The king who judges the poor with truth, his throne will be established forever. The rod and rebuke give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. Now, I've heard people say that this verse is saying that we shouldn't, as parents, as Christian parents, not use time out as a form of punishment. That is not what it's saying, okay? What it is saying is leaving a child to himself as a whole, as your approach to parenting. You would be a massive fool to rear a child or children and then just to leave them to themselves. And it's, to be honest, it's what a lot of my generation is doing. In your generation, some of you are old enough that you could have 4 or 5 kids my age, you know? And our generations are so foolish. We leave our children to themselves in what appear to be the most benign ways, you know, with the phone set to some children's YouTube channel or whatever it is. And there is this laziness that has crept into my generation and the generations around it in parenting, where we leave technology to raise our children because it's easier. Can I tell you guys, don't have kids unless you are ready for the workout of your life. I am dead serious. It is hard work, day in and day out, to be a parent. It will bring you to the end of yourself and then push you over the cliff every day. every single day. In that, if you want to draw close to God, I promise you this, it will make you draw closer to Him, because He's the only one that's going to keep keep you from splatting off when you go off the end of the cliff. I tell you guys the truth. Count the cost, and I'm not trying to discourage you guys from having kids, but I'm telling you what, being a good parent is extremely hard work. It is extremely consistent work, and it is work. And the reason that millennials are what they are, I know you guys have probably seen that YouTube clip that somebody shared recently about millennials. It's very true, but it's one of the things they really didn't talk a lot about. They talked a little bit about, but it's that parents are not parenting. The millennials' parents did not parent them. And they didn't put in the work and the effort and the consistency necessary to remove the foolishness that every single one of us is born with. So the rod and rebuke give wisdom. Not just the rod, not just rebuke, give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. When the wicked are multiplied, transgression increases, but the righteous will see their fall. Correct your son, and he will give you rest. Yes, he will give delight to your soul. Verse 18, where there is no revelation, the people cast off restraint, but happy is he who keeps the law. We'll spend some time on that verse later. A servant will not be corrected by mere words, for though he understands, he will not respond. Do you see a man hasty in his words? There's more hope for a fool than for him. Verse 21, he who pampers his servant from childhood will have him as a son in the end. Pampers is a very, very bad translation of that word. We'll get into that later. It really should be the word everate, but we'll explain that later. Verse 22, an angry man stirs up strife, and a furious man abounds in transgression. Guys, I think this is mostly for the guys, though maybe it is applicable to the girls. We have to fight that battle in our hearts to keep ourselves from becoming the angry man and the furious man. Some of us, I don't know, I don't imagine anybody in here is struggling with this right now, but you probably are, just statistically speaking, guys. Some of you are probably like beneath the surface boiling, because there are things in your life that have added up, things have gone wrong, whatever. The reason I say this, I'm kind of describing myself. About 2 years ago, I found myself to be like a time bomb. Like, I was beneath the surface extremely angry, and the anger really, because I'm a believer, the anger at the situations in my life and the way things had come about eventually always points itself to God, because I believe God exists, I believe He's all powerful, and if I'm angry about the circumstances of my life, guess what? It's only a matter of time before in your heart the anger becomes directed at God. But this truth here, there are men, it's common, I personally believe, for men to allow themselves, some men, some women, I think, become kind of like Eeyore when things go wrong. You know, there were times in my life when I was more like Eeyore when a bunch of things go wrong. I go sit in the corner and hide my head between my knees, and I just cry and feel sorry for myself. People respond differently, but there are some men that they begin to seethe in their anger, and they begin to coddle their anger, and we have to be very careful of that. Please notice what it says here. If you find yourself in your heart, if you're honest with yourself, you say, man, that's really me. Notice it says here, a furious man abounds in transgression. Be careful. If you find yourself in that place, you need to cast your cares on the Lord, because He does care for you. He does care for you. Alicia told me not to share this story, but I'm going to share it because it is appropriate. Sorry, honey. Casting your cares upon the Lord. I'm not going to give you all the details of this story, but Alicia and I talked this morning, and there been some stuff kind of going wrong in our life financially for the last few months, and it was kind of coming to a head, and so we talked this morning, and we talked about this, that we really needed to cast our cares before the Lord. because what we were doing is we were just talking to each other about our cares, and that really wasn't doing a lot. And then there's kind of the next step where you go, well, I'm gonna trust these things to the Lord. And if I may say this without coming off as some sort of heretic, that's really not always quite enough. That's really a step in the process to trust the Lord with some of your cares. If you find yourself saying, I'm trusting the Lord, but you're like really angry or you're really still stressing out, you're not trusting the Lord and you're missing the next step. And the next step is you actually need to get on your face, get alone, whatever, and you need to actually cast those cares. Pray. Tell the Lord all those cares as though you would tell your best friend or the person in control of those cares, and cast those cares on the Lord. And the only reason I'm sharing this is because Alicia and I did that this morning about our financial problems and about something very, very specific, about seeking a certain ministry option that would bring about financial reimbursement. And it was really cool because God spoke to Alicia this morning through the Word, and she sent me a verse about 8:30 in the morning that answered our issue exactingly, and it was a blessing, and we were both rejoicing. We were thanking the Lord, and basically the Lord was saying, you need to trust me with this, and I've got this under control. And then this afternoon, I'm trying not to give you too many details, but God gave one of us a really, not a huge, but a really decent raise. And so it was this really special thing happened today where this kind of frustration was came to a head this morning. We cast our cares on the Lord, and then the Lord spoke to us, and it was all about trusting Him and leaving it in His hands. And as we did that, then the provision came through, and it was really a blessing. So I tell you guys the truth. If you find yourself in a state like that, you really need to not just kind of passively, chalk it up to I'm just trusting it in the Lord, because I have found that that's not really enough in a lot of cases, because what you're really doing is you're burying it down deep. You're not actually dealing with the issue. And so you need to cast those cares on the Lord, because He cares for you. Not just He loves you, He actually cares for you. That's a big difference, because I think a lot of us, we tend to think of, okay, God loves me, and we think of that austere parental love where He's always doing what's in our best interest, but not really what's the warm, sweet thing that He could be doing. But you can't get that out of care, because care, there's the idea of a mother caring for a child tenderly. He cares for you. Verse 23, a man's pride will bring him low, but the humble in spirit will retain honor. Whoever is a partner with a thief hates his own life. He swears to tell the truth, but reveals nothing. The fear of man brings a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord shall be safe. Many seek the ruler's favor, but justice from man comes from the Lord. An unjust man is an abomination to the righteous, and he who is upright in the way is an abomination to the wicked. I can't imagine. This is our culture right now. This is the American people right now. An unjust man is an abomination to the righteous, and he who is upright in the way is an abomination to the wicked. Like, the American populace, as everybody is so clearly saying, is divided, and one side hates the other side. It's crazy. So, a couple things. 3 places in chapter 29 reference being trapped or snared. So, one of the things we're going to consider in a bit, actually we're going to consider it right now, are the 3 references to being snared or being trapped. And they are there in verse 5. It says, a man who flatters his neighbor spreads a net for his feet. Verse 6, by transgression an evil man is snared, but the righteous sings and rejoices. And there in verse 25, the fear of man brings a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord will be safe. So 3 types of snares. There's the flatterer who's spreading a net for his neighbor's feet. He's trying to snare him and snare him. Transgression. And then through the fear of man brings a snare. So this gives us a little bit of insight. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on these points, but this gives us a little bit of insight into 3 common traps that the devil is trying to set before us. And I'm going to kind of focus not so much on the traps themselves, but what makes them work on us. For example, like some traps rely on bait. Like I fish, and to ensnare a fish, you have to use, typically it's all about the bait. But then that's not the only type of trap. There are other types of traps, like if you go lobstering, if you go catch lobsters, you're not really using bait, you actually use a tickle stick, and you're actually prodding them into the snare, and there are different types of snares. There are different those types of things. And here we find these three types of snare: flattery, transgression, and the fear of man. So flattery relies on something in the hearer. When a neighbor flatters a person, when someone comes to you and flatters you, when the enemy is trying to flatter you, and the devil will, if he can't destroy you, he will, through temptation, through transgression, through bringing about transgression, he'll switch tactics, and instead he'll start whispering in your ear and saying, "You are so awesome." He'll bring people across your path. He'll bring something about to tell you how great you are, to make you trust in yourself more, to build up your pride and your self-sufficiency, which, by the way, makes you less useful to the Lord. The more self-sufficient you are, inversely, proportionately speaking, the less useful you will be to the Lord. And if you give in, there is the verse that says, pride goes before destruction. A haughty spirit goes before a fall. Pride goes before destruction. And so there is this truth in that so he's trying to build up your pride and make you haughty so that you might come about a fall. But if you really take hold of it, there is actually some destruction coming in your life. There's some real consequences. And this here says that flattery can be a snare. So the first thing I wanted to say about that is that it is dependent upon something in you. Just like if I'm using bait when I'm fishing, I want to use bait that the fish likes. One of my first experiences with fishing was a complete disaster. Was with Club Zion, and I took a bunch of the young guys out, and we were going to go surf fishing for night at Sharks. And I didn't know what I was doing. I went to Publix and bought beef. I was like, sharks like blood, and meat. And so I literally went to Publix and bought slabs of cheap steak and put them on hooks, and we went and threw them out and went surf fishing at night for sharks. We didn't catch a thing. I didn't know. It really doesn't appeal to sharks. You need bloody dead fish fillets. Anyways, it's dependent upon something in the person. And the truth here is that flattery is dependent upon pride, right? And so here's the thing, though. It's not just about slowing you down. It's not just about tripping you up. It's actually about spreading a net for your feet and capturing you. And this is the thing you have to be very careful about, because your enemy goes about like a roaring lion, seeking who he may devour. He doesn't just have one tactic. His tactics aren't just as simple as, temptation, I'll just throw temptation out there. More temptation, more temptation. When temptation doesn't work, he will take a different tactic. And this is where a lot of Christians mess up and they miss it, is when he takes a tactic of, you're so great. You're amazing. You're awesome. And you know what's crazy? You can turn on Christian radio and hear that now. Pastors and teachers oftentimes unwittingly doing the devil's handiwork because of the influx of psychology and the self-esteem movement. It's really quite sad. So the second one there, transgression. This one's a little bit more obvious. Transgression, verse 6. By transgression, an evil man is snared. By transgression. And again, like I mentioned before, it does reference transgression. It does reference sin as something that can ensnare us in the New Testament, even as believers. And I think about this, that I could use illustration after illustration. I'm sure we could all think of 10 of illustrations of stories of people, of believers who fell into some sort of transgression, and it was a snare to them, and it trapped them, and it destroyed what God wanted to do in their life. And so be careful of transgression. I think sometimes it's easy for us, and the devil wants us to believe that a sin is just a sin. I don't think I got to teach. I'm trying to remember. I recently taught Hebrews 3, or I was studying for it, and we came across the passage where it was talking about the deceitfulness of sin. And we talked about that one aspect of the deceitfulness of sin goes back to the garden. Sin and deceit. When the devil deceived Eve into sinning, what did he deceive her by? The out and out lie was that there will be no consequences. And this is the truth about this too. This idea that we look at it, and the devil wants us to look at sin as though, oh, it's just something we do. It's not even, we're not even, culture doesn't even call it sin anymore. It's just a choice. It's a lifestyle. It's this, that, or the other. But the truth is, not only is it an action, not only will it have consequences, but it's a snare. It entraps people. And this is something that I've seen. The saddest thing to me, one of the saddest things to me in the life of a person, in the life of a believer, is not when they fall into sin. It's 6 months, a year or two down the road, when they've fallen into the sin and it's now a snare. The sin has got them. They want out of it. They want to stop it, and they cannot. They are powerless to stop it. They can't stop the sin. It has its teeth in them. Guys and girls, can I tell you, this has been my experience as a believer. That on-ramp onto sin, yeah, it comes and you have the opportunity to get onto the highway of sin and you don't think it's a big deal. But the problem is as I've heard it described, and I really think it's an apt description, the highway of sin doesn't have as many off-ramps as you would like. And this idea of it ensnaring you is that once you take that on-ramp and you're on the highway, yeah, the next off-ramp might be a couple miles down the road. And God is faithful to give you opportunities to repent where there is grace given at that opportunity, where you hear a message and a pastor's preaching or an evangelist is preaching and you feel moved and that there's actually that grace. Hey, I really want to repent and I could, but then you resist that. The next off-ramp, it might be 40 miles down the road where you have been ensnared by this transgression. It is ruling your life. It is gobbling up meaningful things in your life. Be careful, guys. Thirdly, this idea of the three types of snares that we see in this chapter, verse 25, the fear of man. The fear of man. Whereas flattery relies on pride in the prey, and transgression relies on desire in the prey, James 1 says that each one is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. The fear of man relies really on a love of this world, in the person. A love of prolonging your existence in this world, or a love of this world itself, caring what people think about you. You know that as long as you care about what people think about you, you will not be free. Freedom is an illusion to the person who cares about what people think. You are a slave to popular opinion. And now this isn't necessarily a very life-altering message for a lot of you guys. I know a lot of you guys, you have no love of the world system. I can tell you guys, product of public schooling, I have such a deep, thorough hatred of the world system, of the dog-eat-dog, climbing on top of each other, just that I hate that system and how people use each other and they brutalize each other to get ahead. And God used that in my life. All those experiences in that scenario to give me such a thorough hatred of the world system, and He's still doing it. But I tell you guys the truth. This idea here of the fear of man, it's really, if you've never heard it before, it's contrasted in Scripture with something else, which gives us probably one of our clearest definitions of it. It's contrasted in Scripture with the fear of God. And you guys know that. You know that in the Gospels, Jesus contrasted it with the fear of God. In particular, talking about the Tower of Siloam, when He was asked that question about the people that died in the Tower of Siloam. And Jesus responds to those guys and says, and basically in his discussion with them says, you guys, and they also asked about the guys that died in that rebellion. And He says, you guys shouldn't fear man who can destroy the body. He said, you should fear God, who after the body is destroyed can cast you into hell. And this is a very interesting truth. So right there, in the contrast between the fear of God and the fear of man, we see one of the truths about it, that it's dependent upon a love of this world and a love of my life being prolonged in this world. So if you have a problem with fearing man, there are basically two sides of it that I see. There is the love of this world and prolonging your biological life here, but then there is the love not only just of the longevity of a biological life, but the wanting people to like you and desiring to be cool or whatever, to fit into that scenario. Both of those will lead you to a place where you are afraid of man, and Jesus had nothing good to say about the fear of man. Here it says the fear of man is a snare, it's a trap. It will keep you from usefulness in God's kingdom. Well, I mean, obviously, if you fear man, you're never going to reach out and tell them the truth about their eternal state. You're never going to do what's necessary. But even alongside of that, even just as a human being, even non-Christians recognize that the idea of being a slave to public opinion, that the politician or the person that's trying to gain this ground as a human being, whatever it may be, they really end up oftentimes, instead of being on top of those people, being a slave to those people. I think about Pontius Pilate. You guys, I'm sure you guys have heard at one point or another, you even know about Pilate's history, but Pilate was really in a hard place when the Jews brought Jesus to him, right? You guys know that. Pilate was in a bad spot politically, because even though he was a powerful man, he was responsible to Caesar, and it's been clearly stated that he already had 2 strikes on his record with the Jews. And if there was another outbreak in Jerusalem, Pilate was going to have to go back to Caesar and explain it, and it might cost him his life. And it's crazy when you think about it that the fear of man was a snare even to such a powerful person. But you see it with Stalin. I think of Stalin because Stalin, one of the most powerful people that ever lived, kept the entire Soviet Union under his boot, was a man completely controlled by fear. He had so many different tea tasters because he was always afraid of being poisoned. When he would go places, he would have multiple carriages go so that if there was an assassination attempt, maybe they'd get the wrong one. And I think about people like that, and story after story. I just read this article this week about a mobster and how he wasn't even a Christian. He hadn't gotten saved. He just had gotten out of the mob because he got caught and he made a deal with the FBI. And the whole article, though, was how he was talking about how everybody in the mob is completely governed by fear. And he was talking about how all of the hitmen all fear the boss, and they all fear each other and everybody. And it was crazy to think of these people that the world oftentimes views as powerful and completely in control, and to think that instead of actually being powerful and having a sort of freedom based on that power, they were actually in bondage to fear. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. But the fear of man brings a snare. But whoever trusts in the Lord will be safe. So, moving on from those, I also want to talk here kind of quickly about 10 disqualifications for leadership. Kind of a bummer, huh?
Yes.
Hate to be such a downer. But, so, as I'm reading the commentaries on this passage, they make a really good point. Chapters 20 through 30 are really the chapters dealing with how to be a king. Remember, Solomon was writing this to Rehoboam, and he knew his son was a fool, and he was attempting through teaching to give him some wisdom, though he obviously failed in that pursuit. But chapter 29 in particular is really about, not the whole chapter, but scattered throughout it are all of these comments about political leadership, about being a king and who to promote and who not to promote. And J.B. Phillips in particular, in his commentary, that's actually the outline he takes for chapter 29. He takes an outline as though this chapter is dealing specifically with all the don't elevate this type of man, don't elevate this type of man, don't elevate this type of man into your political reign when you become king. Don't do this. And so I didn't really follow his outline even really to a T, because I see in 10 of these verses some verses that really correlate with the qualifications for leadership given in 1 Timothy and the other pastoral epistles. There are qualifications and disqualifications for being a church leader given in the pastoral epistles. And so tying in with those, and then also tying in with my own experience, I see in here 10 in this chapter. So in verse 2, it says, in verse 2, dealing with our first disqualification for leadership, wickedness. Okay? Wickedness. It says there, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice, but when a wicked man rules, the people groan. This wickedness here, it means godless or lawless. Wickedness, right? But for our purposes, as you guys are getting older, you guys are the church of today, but you will very soon find yourselves to be the church leaders of tomorrow, should you progress in the Christian faith, as I hope that you do. These may become more important to you as you guys get a little bit older and you start making more leadership decisions, and you actually are the one that bears the mantle of responsibility in deciding, should I ask this person to come into leadership? You guys are probably aware that it is a lot easier to ask a person into a place of leadership or authority or worship ministry or something than it is to ask them to leave. I don't know if you ever thought that, but like worship ministry is a really good example. They're all bad. It's really, really heartbreaking to ask anybody to leave a position of authority of any kind. But I remember that spouses are the worst. Spouses and girlfriends and boyfriends are the worst. I remember at a church that we used to be a part of, one of the guys in the band, his spouse had wanted for years and years and years and years and years, she just had it on her sweetheart, and she was a sweetheart, to sing. And they made the mistake of someone finally granting it to her, and she was terrible. She was really, really bad. And they kind of patronized her and let her come to the practice and let her do the practices, but then she was like, well, why am I not singing? Why am I only coming to the practices? And then it's like, oh, okay, you can sing with us. And they tone her down, they put her up in her monitor and they tone her down and everything. And it's like, and it becomes this fiasco where then the sound guy makes the mistake of leaving her up in the lead singer's monitor, in his inner ear, and so he's off key, all service one. Yeah, Josh fails. No, the other. And so now the lead singer is off key the entire time because they can't figure out what's going on, and they turned up her mic and his monitor. And then finally someone says, all right, we got to tell her. We just got to tell her she can't do it. Dude, it was heartbreaking. This lady was absolutely devastated. It is so much easier to ask someone into a position of leadership than it is to ask them to step down into whatever ministry it might be. And this one here, wickedness or lawlessness, I know you guys are like, duh, like... Really? Yeah. Let's not let the pagan into the... But you know what? I've had only experiences with relatively good churches, but there are some bad churches out there. There are a lot of bad churches out there that have practically no qualifications for a person to be in a position of leadership. For people that are... I know of a church in particular that allows a man to be on their worship band, have a serious position in their worship band, and I work with him day in and not anymore actually. I used to work with this guy day in and day out, and he was the most filthy mouth. And I don't just mean that he used the F word every other word, which he did, but he was always telling raunchy, horrible jokes. And I'm just sitting there going, what are the people at your church thinking? Like when you go and it blows my mind, because this actually is an issue in places. Verse 4, second disqualification for godly leadership. In verse 4, it says they're receiving bribes. The king establishes the land by justice, but he who receives bribes overthrows it. This one I see as given to greed. We need to be very careful when elevating people into leadership that they not be given to greed. Obvious, right? Right. Well, let me deal with something that's a little less obvious, since that one's really obvious. You don't want to give a position of godly leadership to a person who is money hungry and will do anything for it, right? That's horrible. That person is going to destroy people, use people. That's horrible. But what I do see instead of this in Christianity often is the elevating of people who have a really, really good amount of money because they have that really big, nice house. I remember InterVarsity. I had friends that were a part of InterVarsity. And whenever they did a meeting, it was the InterVarsity chapter that was out of one of the Melbourne schools at the time. I don't remember if it was FIT or if it was Brevard Community College, but it was the InterVarsity that was a part of that. And whenever they would do a meeting, it was always at a mansion. It always had to be at a mansion, and it wasn't because they were busting at the seams and they had 70 kids, 70 college students. It was just because the leader had this issue with money. It was like, it was, I don't know if it was like a name it, claim it issue, or like, if God's in it, you're going to be blessed and you're going to be wealthy. But my point is this, is that the leaders of this particular ministry had an issue with money, and they had an issue with wealth, and they really liked big houses. They really liked that thing. And oftentimes you'll find people with this issue talking about the size. Well, we can fit a lot of people there. And as a youth pastor over the years, I oftentimes had to say, yeah, I know we can fit 80 people in your mansion, but we only have 20 kids. You know, we don't need a mansion. And so more often than you guys even know, I would decline those situations for a very important reason. Because I never wanted to mix Christianity with affluence. Because the two don't mix. The two actually don't mix. Now, I understand that God blesses some people, and occasionally there is the Christian that through God's blessing, they get massively blessed, you know, and they don't even know what to do with all the money they have. That's cool. It's not that we never use somebody's big, giant mansion on the river, you know. We did on occasion when there was a reason and there was something that necessitated it, yes. The reason I'm going here is that as you guys get older, you need to be careful, because there are some churches, and churches I've even been a part of over the years, where it seemed like it was practically one of the qualifications to be an elder in that church that you were highly successful in the world. And if you looked at the elders board of that church, every single one of the people, of the men on the elders board, all 12 of them or 8 of them, all of them were highly successful in the business world. And there's nothing wrong with being highly successful in the business world, but when you look at it, and 8 out of 8 of the people are all highly successful, I have a bit of a problem with that. Because some of the most, not all, but some of the most godly people that I've ever met, some of the most apt to lead people that I have ever met, have been some of the poorest people that I have ever met. Now, I'm not saying to be poor is to be more spiritual than rich, if you guys are following what I'm saying. But what I am saying is there is an error that some Christian leadership falls into when they choose to do events. It has to be at an extremely extravagant house, some 10,000 square foot mansion on the river, and jet skis out the wazoo, and this, that, and the other. And there's a point where I just go, where's the Lord in this event that we're doing? Because all it feels like we're saying to these kids is that success in the world is great. And I have a problem with that, because by and large, 98% of the time, that runs directly in conflict to true Christianity. Being successful in the world and pursuing it to any degree can be a massive mistake. Pursuing it is a massive mistake. Let's just make that really clear. Pursuing it is a massive mistake. Should God bring it, that's great. Use your money to bless people and to help people. We should do that. But what's interesting is oftentimes people they don't want to use their money. A lot of wealthy people, not all, but a lot of wealthy Christians, they don't want to use their money to bless people. They want to use their luxuries to bless people. And there's a big difference. There's a big difference to using your luxuries to bless people instead of giving your money away and actually helping people that need it. I'll get off that except to say this. People qualified to lead should not be given to money. I'm not saying they shouldn't be wealthy. I'm not saying they shouldn't be successful. But if that's the measure, that church has erred massively, and it shouldn't be so. Third disqualification for leadership, verse 8, scoffing. Scoffers set a city aflame, but wise men turn away wrath. I think about somebody that I at one point, many, many years ago, elevated to leadership, and this this person was way too young and I shouldn't have done it. But I really liked this person, and they were quite dynamic, and they always really clicked with everybody really well. But the way that they always clicked with everybody was through scoffing. They were always making fun of somebody or something. And what was really weird about it too, and it dawned on me later, and as I was thinking about this afternoon, it really sunk into me that it really tied in with this attitude of pretty much just about not taking anything seriously. They would even scoff at godly things. And it really became a stench to me after I had elevated this person to a place of leadership, and in an event here and a situation here, I found this person to be breaking what God was doing because they could practically never take anything seriously. They always had to be joking, and it was usually at somebody else's expense, sometimes at the expense of the truth that was being considered. And we have to be careful of this. Scoffing or not taking anything seriously, in my opinion, is a disqualification for leadership, because one of the qualifications mentioned in the pastoral epistles for leadership is to be sober-minded. Some churches took that so far, and I'm not saying we should take it this far, but some churches took that teaching right there, that there were leaders, bishops, pastors, teachers should be sober-minded, that in entire denominations, pastors were not allowed to tell jokes from the pulpit because they felt like it broke the sober-mindedness. I'm not saying we should take it to that degree, but I think that there are some Christians who their lack of sobriety, their lack of having a sober mind, being sober-minded, really, in my opinion, if it's to a crazy extent, disqualifies them from leadership. And there's a person in my mind that I really remember this about them, and I really regretted elevating them to a place of leadership because their lack of ability to take anything seriously, and for it to manifest itself in joking, which bordered oftentimes and crossed over the border of scoffing, was really a stench at times. Fourth disqualification for leadership in verse 10. The bloodthirsty hate the blameless, but the upright seek his well-being. In the qualifications for elders, deacons, and bishops in the pastoral epistles, it says that the man should not be a striker. So obviously, the person should not be slapping people around, should not be slapping his wife around. Girls, you shouldn't be beating people up. But I'm still debating on whether to use my illustration, my example. I probably won't use that example. I will just go as far as to say this, that there are some pretty brutal things out there nowadays. When I think about like MMA and stuff like that, and I'm not saying you're going to hell if you watch mixed martial arts or that type of stuff. But I do have to say that for a believer, the closer you come to Christ, I do wonder when I've met Christians who are like super duper duper into ultimate fighting and MMA and like watching it all the time, and I'm just like, dude, these people are like beating each other to a pulp. And I know it's a sport, but it's I don't know, it blows my mind. So this idea of bloodthirstiness is, we have to be really careful with it. I'm not saying you can't be a leader if you watch MMA. I'm just saying that there are some people that cross the line, though. There's actually like a bloodthirstiness to it, and it's kind of sketchy. Fifthly, verse 12, listening to lies. The fifth disqualification for leadership there. If a ruler pays attention to lies, all his servants become wicked. Listens to lies. A person who has no discernment has no place in leadership, in godly Christian leadership. If you can't tell the difference between a lie and a truth, you should not be in leadership. And as you guys come to the place where you begin to lead, and it becomes incumbent upon you to decide in certain cases who you should bring alongside in positions of leadership, Can I tell you, this is one of the big ones. The person needs to have discernment. They need to be able to see through lies. They need to have both intellectual discernment and spiritual discernment, because those two are they're two completely different things. They need to be able to see through the common intellectual and philosophical arguments of the day. True, they need to not give heed to those lies, but then it'd be extremely important that they actually have spiritual discernment, that they actually be able to spiritually discern with a person, with the things that are being said. Hey, there's something wrong here, and so for me, that is something I look for when we need a leader, or when we need to elevate someone to a place of leadership. When we've had to do that over the years, this has been something. Not that I've known this list all over the years, but it's been something very important to me when I consider a person. It's one of the greatest evidences of that the person is a Christian, that you're seeing spiritual manifestation in their life, that they can actually spiritually feel things. Hey, there wasn't something really quite right about this. I couldn't put my finger on it, but what do you think about it? Oh, well, that's actually, there's a whole biblical concept about that, and we talk about it. And that's an evidence in that person's life that they have the gift of discernment, that they actually have the spiritual gift of discernment. That is so important to as an attribute in a person to be used in spiritual authority. Sixthly, sixth disqualification for spiritual leadership in verse 14 there. The king who judges the poor with truth, his throne will be established forever. The king who judges the poor with truth. Now, in the Bible, it says in the law that the people were not to show partiality in judgment to the poor or to the wealthy. It seems to be a massive problem, especially in the last 8 years of our culture, where people showed massive partiality to the poor. At least in the media they did, and in catchphrases they did. But there was this massive partiality shown. And what I see here in this one in verse 14 is that a person given to showing partiality has no place in leadership. And at this point, I really think back to the youth group days where we had student leaders, and so you have this big body of teenagers who are like an emotional wreck. And then you have like these people that you elevate to positions of leadership to help you handle these people and minister to these kids. And it'd be so important that these leaders that you put in these places don't show partiality. That they don't show partiality to the cool kids, but they also don't show partiality to the poor kids or to the wealthy kids. Because I have seen, one of the most retarded things I've ever seen in my life is when you have a youth pastor or some sort of leader in a youth group who's sort of like trying to relive their teenage years as a cool person by connecting with the cool kids and getting buddy with them, and you're just like, dude, you're like 30. Can you just like act 30 instead of trying to relive your high school days as a 30-year-old? They still dress like they're 18. I'm getting on my soapbox. This partiality that's shown, though, is a great evil. It is one of the greatest inhibitors in youth groups across our country. You guys know, I was youth pastor for 10 years, so that's like my area of experience is that. And so I relate a lot of it to that there is so much damage done all over the world, probably in America, through youth groups, through a lot of my experience with youth groups as a teenager, and then as a leader, and then as a youth pastor. All of the experience I've had, what a great amount of damage is done by leaders who show partiality. I've seen disagreements in youth groups between kids, and then seen the meeting that's brought about, and seen leaders in the meeting show partiality and judgment to the kid that they favor or the kid that they're closer to. And I'm looking at it going, no, that's not actually what happened here. You're just choosing sides with this person because they're your buddy. And there was fault on both sides, or actually it was their fault. And this idea of showing partiality, I'll tell you guys, it is a disqualification. This is a big one for me that I've seen over the years. I've seen it really destroy people when partiality is shown. We must be very, very careful to be just in judgment. Seventh disqualification for leadership there in verse 16. When the wicked are multiplied, transgression increases, but the righteous will see their fall. When the wicked are multiplied, I see this here as permissiveness. Permissiveness is a disqualification for spiritual leadership. Permitting the wicked to multiply is a big problem. I caught a lot of flack for it when I took the youth group at Calvary Chapel, actually, because the youth group was kind of large. I think there were like 45 or so kids in the youth group when I took it, and probably about half of them were sincere. And I came in like a bull in a china shop, because that's what, not because it's my style, but it's because it's what I believe about ministry. I don't believe the purpose of the youth group, I don't believe the purpose of this group is to bring in as many non-believers as possible to the point where at any given point in the group, half the people are non-believers and half the people are believers, and only half of them are even really hardcore believers, because what happens is the atmosphere is almost always destroyed and overrun by the non-believers. It's not the model of the church. You guys know that? The model of the church is given in Ephesians, that the pastor equips the flock to go out and do the work of the ministry. And too many churches are so broken inside because there's no healthy, warm place for the believers to gather and to experience koinonia, that fellowship that we have one with one another. That is the purpose of the church. And if you guys, I know that even sometimes in this group, there can be a point where if a person's new, they may not understand that. And they're like, why aren't you more focused on bringing a bunch of non-believers in? Well, we welcome non-believers. I don't have a problem with that. I've had people get saved in a scenario like that, where I actually had a kid get saved. A friend brought him to a prayer meeting, and he interrupted the prayer meeting in the middle of it. He's like, I have a question about all this, and he just started going off, and everybody's like, what just happened, And then we started talking, and then he got saved. It was amazing. I don't have a problem with that. But what I do have a problem with is the paradigm of ministry that treats the church as though the church is the gathering place for evangelism, and it's really not intended to be that way. And so what happens is this permissiveness, there's a permissiveness in a lot of churches that the leaders put up with all of this wickedness in the church because they have a misunderstanding of what the church is. And what happens is, when the wicked increase, transgression increases. And so when I came into the youth group at Calvary Chapel, there was a lot of blessed subtraction that happened really quickly. A lot of kids didn't come back after the first time. A lot of kids didn't come back after the first month. And it was blessed subtraction. These people were leeches, spiritual leeches that were destroying and sucking the life out of what God wanted to do there. So I don't permit the wicked to flourish in the church as best as I can, and you have to be careful of that. You should never elevate people to positions of leadership who give that permissiveness, because a little leaven leavens the whole lump, and that thing that God is doing will be soured, will be rotted, just like leaven does. It will leaven the whole lump. Verse 18, where there is no revelation, the people cast off restraint, but happy is he who keeps the law. No revelation, verse 18, the eighth disqualification for leadership is spiritual blindness. Whenever I see that in a person, I don't think that person belongs in leadership. Not at this point, at least. The ninth disqualification for leadership in verse 20. Do you see a man hasty in his words? There's more hope for a fool than for him. Hastiness. A lot of young people misinterpret hastiness for spirituality. They're like, I'm always out and about, and I'm always, I'm moving fast, and God moves fast, and they always, and I think that there's a mistake there with hastiness. I think hastiness is a disqualification for leadership. I think, and what I'm getting at is something very specific. I was thinking about Nehemiah when Artaxerxes asked him why his countenance was downfallen. Before answering, he prayed. I think about the early days and then even the later days in David's wanderings when he was in the wilderness, when he was being pursued by Saul, and then on into his ministry, into his life. He prayed before he did things. I think about how Jesus prayed before he did things, like before he called his disciples and chose his disciples. He prayed. And hastiness, I've known people, I know this may seem odd, but I've known people who've mistaken hastiness for some sort of hyper-spirituality. Like they're just always doing something, they're always busy, and I think that that's a mistake. It's really it's a cloak for restlessness. It's not real spirituality to be hasty. Even Peter, before he actually jumped out of the boat, he didn't just jump out of the boat, he asked. When he saw the Lord walking on the water, he said, Lord, if it's you, command me. And then he went after he was commanded. I think hastiness is a big mistake, and it's a sign of a spiritual defect that says that person's not ready for leadership. The 10th disqualification for leadership, verse 26, is being unjust. And I already really bled into this one when I was talking about partiality, but we must be just in our leading. So, real quick, I don't have a lot to say about this, but the final thing is verse 18, where there is no revelation, the people cast off restraint. The people cast off restraint. I just want to say this. Many of you may not know this, but Calvary Chapel actually, the entire Calvary Chapel movement experienced a split on my birthday of last year, actually. On November 28th of 2016, there was a split between in the CCA and the council, the 10-person council that kind of Chuck left behind. And it split because Brian Broderson in particular believes a handful of things, among them being that he doesn't want to focus on or teach prophecy anymore, and he said that Chuck Smith taught too much prophecy, and that's why so many young people stopped coming to the church. And so one of the things that Brian Broderson of Costa Mesa, Calvary Chapel Costa Mesa, did and has said, and it's recorded, the Calvary Chapel North Pastors Conference Northwest or whatever, we need to not teach so much prophecy. I'm not going to teach the Old Testament verse by verse anymore. We'll cover the Old Testament truths as we're teaching the New Testament. I get what he's saying, but he's massively in error. Partly here we see in this verse, it ties in kind of succinctly with what's going on with him, that where there is no prophecy, the people cast off restraint. Prophecy has an interesting connection to licentiousness and to holiness. As we've talked about at length before, holiness and hope are linked. I'm not going to go into that because we don't have time, because there's another thing I want to talk about. So I just say this to say that if any of you have heard about that, we can talk more about it at some point, but Brian Broderson is really in error there by saying, I'm never going to teach prophecy. I get what he's saying. You can focus too much on prophecy. The Bible isn't all prophecy, though it is a lot of prophecy. It's not all prophecy. I get that. That being said, though, we do need to focus on it. Now, what I want to say, though, here in closing, in the last minute or two, is that there is another type of prophecy, too, that is equally as important to holiness and to the grounded Christian life. Not just the telling forth of the future or dealing with the passages that foretell the yet coming future, or the passages in the Old Testament that foretold the future to them, which is now the past for us. There's that type of prophecy. But then there is the prophetic word, and the word here in the Hebrew is the prophetic word for today. Prophecy is not, as we've talked about, only telling the future. It is also simply speaking God's heart to us here today. When we operate in the gift of prophecy today, when a teacher or a man or woman operates in the gift of prophecy, which 1 Corinthians chapter 14 verse 1 says that every single one of us should desire to have the gift of prophecy so that we can speak God's heart, God's will to the people around us. We should desire it. When someone prophesies, they're doing that. They're speaking God's word for today. And if you go back and even look at the prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah, it was not all future telling. A lot of it, a very, very significant portion of it, was simply God's word for them today. Hey, this is what you guys are doing. If you don't stop, these consequences are going to come. And a lot of time, it wasn't even specific, prophetic, like, these people are going to come and do this to you on this day. It was just, here's the consequential future that you face because of the choices that you're making. It was speaking God's word to the people today. This is one of the things that is very lacking in the church. Not just covering biblical prophecy, but the type of prophecy that tells God's word for today. And I pray that that we would progress on in the Christian faith, where we would all operate more in the gift of prophecy. In the gift of prophecy, speaking God's heart to our brothers and sisters and our fellow man for today. Father, I thank you for your word, and I thank you for the things that we've considered here tonight. I pray that you would sink them deep down into our hearts. The things that were of you, Lord, I pray that you would just bless and that they would bring fruit in all of these young men and women's lives, Lord. Just love you and thank you for this evening. In Jesus' name, amen.